While I was taking off my dress in the bathroom, I heard the faint click of a camera. My own son's laughter echoed through the doorway, followed by his cruel words. "This old body will make us money, Dad." My heart froze. That was the moment I realized that the two people I trusted most, my husband and my only child, were not only mocking me, but using me. That night, a piece of me shattered forever. But, my dears, I will tell you about that as the story unfolds. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, my loves. How wonderful it is to see you all here again. My name is Evelyn Brooks, 70 years young, born and raised in Ashton, Georgia, back when it was just a sleepy southern town with dusty roads and wide fields. I still live here to this day. My hands may be wrinkled, and my hair has turned silver, but my spirit is still alive with stories. As I sit here on my porch, a glass of sweet tea beside me, I watch the magnolia trees sway gently in the breeze. The scent of honeysuckle drifts through the air, and the church bells ring noon in the distance. Life feels simple and beautiful again, though it took me a long, long road to get here. These days, most of my joy comes from volunteering at the Ashton Public Library. Every Wednesday afternoon, the children gather for what they call Miss Evelyn's Story Hour. I sit in a big red chair, a stack of books beside me, and I read to them about faraway places, great adventures, and quiet little lessons tucked between the pages. Their eyes grow wide with wonder. Their laughter fills the air. And for that hour, I know I am planting seeds of imagination and hope in their little hearts. Books, you see, once saved me. In my darkest moments, when my home felt like a prison and my heart felt like a battlefield, the stories I read gave me a way out, if only for a while. They reminded me that pain is never the final chapter, and that healing can be written if you have the courage to pick up the pen. Behind my house is a small garden where I grow roses, mint, basil, and sunflowers that stretch taller than I am. Some mornings, I wake early just to sink my hands into the soil. Planting, to me, has always been a prayer proof that even after storms, life grows again. But, my dear viewers, I didn't always know peace like this. No, for many years, my days were filled with tears I hid behind a smile. And sometimes the cruelest storms come not from strangers, but from those under your very roof. That is why I want to share my story with you today, not because it is easy, but because someone out there may need to hear it. If even one person finds courage in my journey, then every tear I shed in the telling will be worth it. So, my dear friends, before we dive deeper, let me ask you, what little town are you watching from? And what time of day is it where you are? Morning coffee, afternoon rest, or evening after the children are asleep? I love to read your answers. They make me feel as if we are neighbors, gathered right here on this porch. Now, let us begin. To understand how I became the woman I am today, we must go back to a time long before betrayal ever darkened my doorstep. Back to when I was just a barefoot girl with pigtails running through red Georgia clay, the sun warm on my back, and the smell of cornbread drifting from my mama's kitchen. I was born in 1953, in Ashton, Georgia, a place that was little more than a patchwork of farms, a single grocery store, and a church whose white steeple could be seen from nearly every dirt road. Life was simple then, though not always easy. My daddy, Samuel, was a farmhand who worked from sunup to sundown, his hands rough and calloused from years of pulling, planting, and plowing. My mama, Ruth, stayed home with us 5 children, her days filled with cooking, washing, and keeping the house in order. Our home was a wooden house with creaky floors and thin walls that let in the sound of every passing train. The porch sagged in places, but it was the heart of our home. I can still see my mama sitting there in her rocking chair, humming gospel songs as she sewed patches into our clothes. At night, when the fireflies danced outside, We children would chase them with glass jars, our laughter carrying out into the fields. But childhood, as sweet as it was, wasn't without its shadows. My daddy had a temper, one that grew sharper when the weight of bills and bottles pressed down on him. He wasn't always cruel, but when the whiskey spoke louder than his reason, the walls of that house seemed to close in. I remember lying awake at night, listening to the low rumble of his anger, my mama's quiet sobs muffled by the sound of pots and pans. Even as a child, I learned how to read the air in a room, how to step lightly, how to stay quiet, how to protect myself in silence. Still, there were bright spots that kept us children alive with hope. Sundays were my favorite. Mama would dress us in our best hand-me-down clothes, and we'd walk to church together, shoes polished, hair neatly braided. The hymns filled the chapel, and for an hour or two, even Daddy's anger seemed to soften. After service, neighbors gathered under the oak trees with picnic baskets. There'd be fried chicken, sweet potato pie, and laughter that seemed to stitch the community together like one big family. School was another escape for me. The old Ashton Elementary was just 2 rooms, one for the little ones and one for the older kids. My teacher, Miss Clara, had a stern look but the kindest heart. She was the first to notice that I had a gift with words and numbers. "Evelyn," she once told me, pressing a worn book into my hands, "your mind is a door. Don't let anyone close it." That book became my treasure, its pages a secret place where I could hide when the world grew too heavy. Looking back now, I realize those early days shaped me in ways I didn't understand at the time. The laughter in the fields taught me joy. The fear in the night taught me caution. And the books taught me that there was always another world waiting. If only I had the courage to open the page. I didn't know it then, but the little girl running barefoot through Ashton's dusty roads would one day carry scars so deep they nearly broke her. But she would also carry resilience, the kind that only comes from surviving storms and learning to see the sunlight that breaks through afterward. By the time I turned 13, I knew my childhood in Ashton was coming to an end. The small house that once felt like a shelter had become a place heavy with silence and tension. Daddy's temper was sharper than ever, and Mama, though she tried her best, seemed worn down, her laughter fading like the paint on our porch. I loved my family, but I also knew if I stayed, I'd be swallowed by the same cycle that had broken so many before me. It was my Aunt Louise who opened the door to another life. She lived in Atlanta, nearly 3 hours away, and though I had only met her a handful of times, she carried herself with a strength I admired. She was unmarried, worked as a seamstress, and had a small brick house in a neighborhood full of life. When she visited Ashton one summer and saw how things were at home, she pulled Mama aside. Later that night, Mama sat me down on the porch, her hands trembling as they folded mine into hers. "Baby," she whispered, her eyes glistening with tears. "You've got a sharp mind, and this little town can't hold you. Go with your Aunt Louise. Make something better for yourself. Promise me you won't waste your chance." I promised her, though my heart felt like it was breaking in two. Leaving home at 13 isn't easy no matter how strong your spirit. I remember packing my few belongings, a worn Bible, 2 dresses, and the book Miss Clara had given me into a small cloth bag. My twin brothers cried as I kissed them goodbye. Mama held me so tightly I could feel her heartbeat racing against my cheek. And Daddy just sat on the porch, staring off at the fields, a half-empty bottle by his side. He didn't say a word. The ride to Atlanta was like stepping into another world. Paved streets stretched wide, cars honked impatiently, and lights flickered in shop windows even after the sun had gone down. I pressed my face to the window of the bus, marveling at the sheer size of it all. I was a country girl, wide-eyed and frightened, but also curious about the possibilities before me. Aunt Louise welcomed me with a firm hug and no-nonsense words. Evelyn, if you're going to live here, you'll work hard, study harder, and keep your head high. No excuses. Her house was small but clean, with a garden out back where she grew collard greens and tomatoes. She gave me my own corner to sleep in and told me I would be treated like family, but also expected to carry my weight. Life with her was strict but steady. I woke up at 5 each morning to help with chores before school. After classes, I swept floors, washed laundry, and helped her in the shop where she sewed dresses for neighborhood women. And at night, I studied by the dim light of a lamp, determined not to waste the chance my mama had given me. School in Atlanta was unlike anything I had ever known. The classrooms were larger, the children more confident, and the lessons more advanced. At first, I felt out of place. The country girl who spoke too softly and wore patched dresses. But soon I discovered that my love for books and numbers gave me a way to shine. Teachers began to notice me, encouraging me to push forward. For the first time in my life, I felt the stirrings of independence. I wasn't just Ruth's daughter or Samuel's quiet middle child. I was Evelyn Brooks, a girl with a mind full of dreams and a future, waiting to be written. Aunt Louise welcomed me with a firm hug and no-nonsense words. Evelyn, if you're going to live here, you'll work hard, study harder, and keep your head high. No excuses. Her house was small but clean, with a garden out back where she grew collard greens and tomatoes. She gave me my own corner to sleep in and told me I would be treated like family, but also expected to carry my weight. Life with her was strict but steady. I woke up at 5 each morning to help with chores before school. After classes, I swept floors, washed laundry, and helped her in the shop where she sewed dresses for neighborhood women. And at night, I studied by the dim light of a lamp, determined not to waste the chance my mama had given me. School in Atlanta was unlike anything I had ever known. The classrooms were larger, the children more confident, and the lessons more advanced. At first, I felt out of place, the country girl who spoke too softly and wore patched dresses. But soon, I discovered that my love for books and numbers gave me a way to shine. Teachers began to notice me, encouraging me to push forward. For the first time in my life, I felt the stirrings of independence. I wasn't just Ruth's daughter or Samuel's quiet middle child. I was Evelyn Brooks, a girl with a mind full of dreams and a future waiting to be written. I didn't know it yet, but those years in Atlanta would prepare me for love, heartbreak, and choices that would change the course of my life forever. By the time I was 18, Atlanta no longer felt like a strange city. The bustling markets, the sound of the streetcars, the steady hum of life, it had all become familiar. I had grown into a young woman with calloused hands from hard work, and a head filled with knowledge I never imagined I'd carry. Aunt Louise was proud of me, though she never said it in so many words. She was the kind of woman who showed love through discipline, not through coddling. "You've got sense in you, Evelyn," she'd tell me when she saw me bent over my books at night. "Don't let any man take that away." But, as life often teaches us, the heart doesn't always listen to wisdom. I was 19 when I first laid eyes on Thomas Whitfield. He was tall, with dark hair neatly parted, and a smile that could soften the edges of the hardest day. He came into Aunt Louise's shop one afternoon, asking about a suit that needed mending. I remember how he looked at me not just with curiosity, but with a kind of warmth I wasn't used to. Unlike so many others, he didn't see me as just a poor country girl trying to make her way in the city. He spoke to me as though I mattered. We began to see each other often after that. At first, it was innocent walks down Peachtree Street, stopping for ice cream or sitting at the park while I told him about Ashton, about my mama, about the little wooden house I once called home. He listened with patience, nodding as though every word I spoke was important. Thomas, in turn, spoke of big dreams, owning his own business, traveling beyond Georgia, building a life full of comfort and success. He had a way of painting the future so vividly that I could almost see it. It wasn't long before my heart belonged to him. He was charming, attentive, and protective in ways that made me feel safe. Aunt Louise, however, was not impressed. Men who talk too sweet often hide a bitter tongue. She warned me one evening as I folded laundry beside her. But I was young and in love, blind to anything beyond the glow of Thomas's attention. When he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. We had a small ceremony in the church down the street, with Aunt Louise standing stiffly at the back, her lips pressed tight. I wore a simple cream dress she had sewn herself, and Thomas looked proud as he slipped the ring onto my finger. At first, married life was as sweet as I had dreamed. We rented a small house in a quiet neighborhood, not far from the hardware store where Thomas began working. I found a part-time job at an office, keeping books and filing papers. In the evenings, we would sit on the porch together, Thomas talking about our future, me listening with my heart full of hope. Then, not long after, our joy grew even greater when I discovered I was pregnant. I can still remember the way Thomas lifted me into his arms when I told him, spinning me around as though the world itself had just turned brighter. When our son, Daniel, was born on a cool October morning, I felt certain that all the pain of my childhood had finally led me to this moment of joy. Holding him in my arms, with Thomas by my side, I believed I was standing at the beginning of a beautiful story. What I didn't realize then, my dears, was that sometimes the beginnings that shine the brightest hide the shadows waiting to grow darker with time. In the early years of marriage, I told myself I had everything I had ever wanted. A husband who provided, a roof over our heads, and a son who filled my arms and my days with joy. From the outside, we looked like the picture of a happy little family. But sometimes, my dears, the cracks in the foundation don't appear all at once. They spread quietly, like roots beneath the soil, until one day the ground gives way beneath your feet. It began with small comments from Thomas, things I brushed off as harmless. If dinner wasn't ready when he came home, he'd sigh and say, "Evelyn, you've had all day, what else were you doing?" If I put on a dress I liked, he might wrinkle his nose and tell me, "That's a bit plain, don't you think? My wife should look sharper." At first, I tried to laugh along, thinking he was teasing. But over time, those words sank deeper than I admitted, and I found myself second-guessing everything I did. When Daniel was still a baby, I returned to part-time work at the office downtown. I loved it there. Numbers made sense in ways people never did, and I felt proud of the paycheck I brought home. But Thomas didn't see it that way. "We don't need your little income," he said one evening as he set my envelope of pay on the table. "Your place is with Daniel. Let me handle the real responsibilities." He said it with a smile, but his tone left no room for argument. Slowly, almost without realizing, I stopped working outside the home. Then came the friendships I used to hold dear. A few women from the library and the neighborhood would invite me out for coffee or ask if I wanted to join a church group. Thomas always found a reason for me not to go. "Those women are gossipers," he'd say. Or, "Why would you waste time when Daniel needs you here?" And if I insisted, he would sulk for days, making me feel guilty for wanting the company of others. Before long, my circle shrank until the only people in my world were Thomas and our son. At first, I told myself this was love, that Thomas simply wanted me close, that his protectiveness was proof of how much he cared. But deep down, there was a tightening in my chest that I couldn't ignore. I began to feel like a bird in a cage, safe, yes, but trapped all the same. Daniel, still young then, adored his father. I often caught him mimicking Thomas's tone, copying his walk, even repeating his little phrases. At first it made me smile. What little boy doesn't want to be like his daddy? But sometimes, when Thomas corrected me sharply in front of him, I noticed Daniel watching with wide eyes. Those eyes began to reflect not just love for his father, but approval of how his father treated me. That realization lodged itself in my heart like a thorn. Looking back, I see how carefully it all unfolded. Thomas didn't need to raise his hand to break me down. His weapon was control over my time, my choices, my friends, even my sense of worth. And by the time I recognized it for what it was, I was already deep inside his web, too entangled to see where the strings began or where they might end. My dears, abuse doesn't always come as a storm. Sometimes it comes as a slow drip, drop by drop, until one day you look around and realize you are drowning. When Daniel was little, he was the sunshine of my days. He would crawl into my lap with sticky fingers, press his little face into my neck, and whisper, "I love you, Mama." In those moments, I felt certain that no matter what storms Thomas and I weathered, my son's love would always be my safe place. But children, my dears, are like clay. They take the shape of the hands that mold them. And Daniel's young eyes were watching, soaking in every glance, every word, every silence between his father and me. It started so subtly that I almost didn't notice. Around the age of 12, his sweet words grew sharper. "Mom, why do you talk like that? You sound old." Or, "You don't know anything about computers, just let Dad handle it." I laughed it off at first, telling myself it was only the edge of adolescence, a boy stretching his wings. But soon, those words cut deeper. One afternoon, I was ironing clothes in the living room when Daniel walked in, tossing his school bag on the couch. "Dad says you don't understand money, is that true?" His tone was casual, but the words pierced me. I had once been so good with numbers, proud of my work in accounting before Thomas pushed me to stop. "Of course I understand money," I said softly. But Daniel only shrugged. "Well, Dad said he takes care of everything because you just mess it up." I felt the blood rush to my cheeks, but I said nothing more. Silence had become my shield. Over the years, Daniel's criticisms grew bolder. At dinner, he would frown at the food I prepared. "Why can't you cook like Mrs. Lane's mom? She makes real meals." If my hair wasn't fixed neatly, he'd shake his head. "You look tired, Mom. You should try harder." And sometimes, when I stood in front of the mirror, smoothing my dress before church, I'd hear his voice behind me. "You know Dad could have done better than you." Those words didn't sound like my son, they sounded like Thomas, echoed through a younger mouth. The most painful moments came in private. Daniel began barging into the bathroom without knocking, laughing at my startled face. "Relax, Mom. What's the big deal? You're so dramatic." His eyes didn't hold the innocence of a boy anymore. They carried something mocking, something rehearsed. I couldn't understand why he seemed almost eager to tear me down. When I tried to talk to Thomas about it, hoping he would guide our boy, he brushed it aside. "He's just growing up, Evelyn. Stop being so sensitive. Maybe if you were tougher, he wouldn't tease you." Sometimes, I even caught a small smirk at the corner of his lips when Daniel humiliated me, as though he were proud of the boy for following in his footsteps. My dears, I cannot put into words the heartbreak of watching your child, your own flesh and blood, mirror the cruelty of the very man who's breaking you. It was as if the safe haven I once believed I had was crumbling, leaving me truly alone under the same roof with the two people who should have been my greatest protectors. I began to ask myself late at night, staring at the ceiling in the dark, was this the son I raised, or had Thomas slowly stolen him from me, shaping him into another weapon in his cruel game? Whatever the answer, one thing was certain. The boy who once called me Mama with love in his voice now said it with disdain. And that cut deeper than any wound I had ever known. The night I discovered the truth, my dears, was the night my heart shattered in a way I thought it never could. I had endured Thomas's sharp words, his quiet control, and even the slow hardening of Daniel's heart against me. But still I told myself, They're my family. They'll never truly mean me harm. I clung to that hope, blind to the shadows gathering under my own roof. It happened on an ordinary evening. Thomas had gone out, and Daniel was in his room with the door closed. I was folding laundry when I heard a muffled laugh coming from his phone speaker. Curious, I stepped closer. The sound that greeted me froze me in place. It was my voice. Shaky, nervous, strained, the kind of voice I had when I thought no one was listening. Then came the click of a camera, and over it, Daniel's laughter echoing through the recording. "Dad, look at her. This will get us views for sure." My knees went weak. With trembling hands, I picked up his phone from where it lay charging on the dresser. What I saw still haunts me. Videos, dozens of them. Clips of me in my most private moments. Cooking in the kitchen, humming to myself. Sitting alone on the porch with tears in my eyes. And yes, even in the bathroom, vulnerable, unaware. Each one laced with Daniel's cruel laughter, sometimes with Thomas's voice egging him on, and underneath, the names of strange accounts, comments, likes, money symbols. They weren't just mocking me, they were selling me. My stomach churned as I scrolled through the messages. This one got us $50. Next time, get her when she's crying, people eat that up. My son, my sweet Daniel, replying with excitement. My husband praising him like a business partner. I dropped the phone as if it had burned me, my chest heaving as though the air itself had turned against me. When Thomas came home later that night, I confronted him, my hands still shaking. He didn't deny it. Instead, he smirked, pouring himself a glass of whiskey. "Evelyn, stop being dramatic. Nobody cares. You should be grateful your uselessness is finally paying for something." His words cut sharper than any knife. And Daniel, my son? He stood there by his father's side, arms crossed, eyes cold. "Dad's right, Mom, it's not a big deal. You're always so sensitive." That was the moment I realized I had lost him not to death, but to the poison of his father's influence. The boy who once pressed his face to my neck for comfort now looked at me like I was nothing more than a joke, a pawn in their cruel little game. I retreated to the bathroom, locking the door behind me, and slid down against the wall. The sobs that tore out of me were not quiet, they were years of silence breaking free. I pressed my hands over my mouth to keep from waking the neighbors, but inside I was screaming. How could they? How could the two people I gave my life to do this to me? My dears, betrayal doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from the people who sit at your table, sleep under your roof, and share your name. And when it does, it cuts so deep that even your soul feels it bleeding. That night, as I lay awake with swollen eyes, one truth finally settled in my heart. If I stayed, they would destroy me completely. And I knew then that something had to change. After that night, my dears, nothing felt the same. The house that once echoed with Daniel's laughter and the promises Thomas whispered now felt like a cage tightening around my chest. Every creak of the floorboards, every click of a camera, every hushed laugh between father and son reminded me that I was no longer a wife or a mother in their eyes. I was a spectacle, a tool, a thing to be used. But even in the darkest corners of despair, a small flame flickered inside me. Call it survival, call it God's whisper. Call it the stubbornness of a country girl who refused to be broken. That flame told me, "Evelyn, if you don't leave now, you'll lose yourself forever." I began to plan quietly, carefully, in the shadows of my own home. At first, it was little things. I started stashing away small amounts of cash from the grocery money Thomas gave me, tucking the bills into an old book on the shelf, the very one Miss Clara had once gifted me. Its pages had saved me before, and now, in a different way, they saved me again. Then I gathered proof. Late at night, when Thomas and Daniel slept soundly, I tiptoed into Daniel's room and copied files from his phone onto a small flash drive I bought at the library. Each click of the mouse felt like thunder in the silence, my heart pounding so hard I feared it would wake them. But I kept going, knowing this evidence would one day speak louder than my voice ever could. Still, fear gripped me. Where would I go? How would I survive? For nearly 40 years, my life had been wrapped around Thomas's rules, his money, his control. The thought of stepping into the world alone again, an older woman with little more than scars, was terrifying. Yet, every time I saw Daniel's eyes, no longer filled with love but with ridicule, the courage inside me grew stronger. The breaking point came one morning. I was in the kitchen, hands wet with soapy water, when I heard Thomas and Daniel in the living room. They were laughing at me. Another video, another cruel game. My body shook, and for the first time, I didn't swallow the pain. Instead, I wiped my hands dry, went to my room, and packed a small bag. Just clothes, the flash drive, and the little Bible Mama had given me when I left Ashton. At dawn the next day, while the house still slept, I slipped out the front door. The air was cool, the streets quiet, and for the first time in decades, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't have a full plan, only a bus ticket and the faint memory of Ashton, the place where my roots began. The place I hoped I could start again. As the bus pulled away, I looked out the window at the shrinking city skyline. My hands trembled, my eyes blurred with tears, but deep inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: freedom. I didn't know what awaited me on the other side of that journey, but I knew one thing for certain: I would never again be their prisoner. When I stepped off that bus in Ashton, it felt as if I had traveled back in time. The air was thick with the scent of pine, and the roads I once ran barefoot as a girl stretched before me. But I was not that carefree child anymore. I was a woman scarred, trembling, but determined to rise. I rented a small room above the corner store, just enough to give me a roof and a place to rest my weary body. And then, for the first time in my life, I made a choice that terrified me more than leaving ever had I decided to fight back. It began at the Ashton Police Department, a squat brick building that smelled of paper, ink, and stale coffee. My hands shook as I walked in, clutching the flash drive in my pocket. "Ma'am, how can I help you?" the officer behind the desk asked, his eyes kind but curious. For a moment, I thought about turning back, about slipping away and burying the truth forever. But then I remembered Daniel's laughter, Thomas's smirk, and the years of silence that had stolen my voice. I need to report a crime," I said, my voice trembling but steady enough to carry. They led me into a small room with pale yellow walls, where a detective named Harris listened as I poured out everything. At first, the words tangled in my throat. How do you explain decades of control, humiliation, and betrayal? But once I began, the dam broke. My story spilled out in sobs and whispers, each memory sharper than the last. Harris didn't interrupt. He simply slid a box of tissues across the table and nodded for me to continue. When I handed him the flash drive, his brows lifted. "We'll need to examine this," he said gently. Later, when the evidence was reviewed, the officer saw it all: the videos, the messages, the cruel laughter. Proof that I hadn't imagined the torment, that I wasn't just a fragile woman exaggerating her pain. The file spoke louder than my trembling voice ever could. The investigation moved swiftly after that. Thomas and Daniel were summoned, their arrogance plain as they dismissed my claims. "She's unstable," Thomas told them. "She doesn't know what she's talking about." Daniel smirked beside him, his arms crossed as if this were all a game. But when the officers laid the evidence before them, the images, the recordings, the trail of money, they had nothing left to hide behind. For the first time, the tables turned. Thomas's charm couldn't save him. Daniel's smirk faltered when the weight of the law pressed down. And I, who had once been their silent victim, sat tall in that chair, my hands folded in my lap, my voice calm and clear. Justice is not quick, nor is it perfect. But in that moment, I knew something had shifted. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer their pawn. I was Evelyn Brooks, and I had found my voice again. As I walked out of the station that day, the sun warming my face, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. Not for revenge, but for freedom, for the chance to reclaim the pieces of myself they had tried so hard to destroy. My dears, justice doesn't erase the scars, but it gives you back the strength to carry them with dignity. The trial that followed was not easy, my dears. I sat in court for weeks, listening as lawyers twisted words, as Thomas tried to charm his way out, and as Daniel avoided my eyes. But no matter how much they denied, the evidence stood firm. Each video, each cruel message, each laugh, they were all pieces of truth that could not be erased. When the judge read the verdict, I felt years of weight lift from my shoulders. Thomas was sentenced. Daniel ordered into a rehabilitation program for his part. The law had spoken, not just for me, but for every silent voice that had ever been mocked, belittled, or betrayed inside their own home. It wasn't victory, I felt it was release. For the first time in decades, I walked out of that courthouse not as a broken woman, but as Evelyn Brooks, free and whole again. Life after justice wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I returned to Ashton, renting a small cottage near the library. The children there welcomed me back to story hour, their wide eyes and laughter reminding me that innocence and hope still live in the world. In my garden, I planted roses and sunflowers, symbols of resilience and new beginnings. Each morning I tend them with hands that are no longer trembling, but steady and strong. And sometimes, when I sit on the porch with a cup of tea, I think of the girl I once was, the barefoot child, the silenced wife, the broken mother, and I whisper to her, "We made it. We survived, and we are free." So, my dear ones, if you take anything from my story, let it be this. You are never too old, too broken, or too lost to begin again. The scars may remain, but they can become the map that guides you toward freedom. Now, before I end, I want to thank each of you for sitting with me through these chapters of my life. Your listening hearts mean more to me than words can say. Please, if my story touched you, don't forget to subscribe. Leave a comment with your thoughts, and share where you're watching from. I read every message, and each one makes me feel a little less alone. Until next time, my love, stay kind, stay strong, and never stop believing in new beginnings.